Hello, welcome back to Map Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. 20 years of Metal Gear. 20 years of Metal Gear. 20 years of Metal Gear. But seriously, it's been 20 years of having Metal Gear in my life. And it has been an impactful series for me and my gaming journey and just, well, life. Um, so I want to share a bit more about that journey with you all. I've talked about Metal Gear Solid and just Metal Gear as a whole on my channel um, quite a bit over time here and there. And I'm here to talk to you about it again and hopefully, connect with some of you all over this amazing series that's quite meaningful to me. Um, so I'm not gonna hold back on this one. Assume spoilers. All right. So with that in mind, if you don't care about spoilers, please press forward. Or if you've already played the games, either way, I just wanted to get that out there because again, I am not holding back. Um, so here we go. With Metal Gear, the first time I've heard of it was actually because of Metal Gear Solid 2. And it was through some friends. They had beaten Metal Gear Solid 2, and one of my friends had let me hear the monologue that Snake gives at the end, which was cool. So, I had several people who had a really positive experience with Metal Gear Solid 2, and I really liked the message that was at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. I don't know why I said it like that. It was a bit redundant, but anyway, pressing forward. Um, However, I didn't get the chance to play Metal Gear Solid 2 at the time because I didn't own a PS2. But things would change in the near future because so there was a period, right, in my gaming history where my initial PlayStation had broken down. I had limited funds and I had to decide would I continue to save up for a PS2? I eventually did, or get a PS1, which was like $50 at that time, and the games were much cheaper. So I went that route and expanded my gaming world that way, like like through Metal Gear Solid and a lot of RPGs, different fighting titles as well, and a whole lot of other games in different genres, and it was good. But for the Metal Gear Solid part, here's the cool thing to me. It's just like I wasn't intentionally going out of my way to get it. It's just like I had heard about Metal Gear Solid 2. It had been a bit since I heard that. And so I went into GameStop and I was like looking through the PS1 games because at that time they still had them. They had them in like plenty, and that was cool. And so I come across Metal Gear Solid, and I'm looking at it and I'm reading, and I'm like, hey, yeah, so this must be the game that came before Metal Gear Solid 2, and because Metal Gear Solid. But it's like, so this must be the game that preceded that. I hadn't really heard much about it, but it seemed and looked really cool. So I took it home and it blew my mind. I hadn't played anything like that. Um, it was too cool. And the story gripped me like immediately. So here you had this game when it had this interesting gameplay, it had this amazing voice cast, and it had a really good and engaging story. And it helped me expand my gaming world. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. If it had just been that, if it had just been that, that would have been good enough. But when I was younger, and I still deal with issues today, but when I was younger, it was my first time dealing with depression and dealing with nihilism, and I was not sure what was really going on at the time, and here's the thing: while Metal Gear Solid did not completely solve my problems there, it absolutely helped. Why, you may ask? Well, see, here's the thing. When you're playing Metal Gear Solid, if you played it, you get it. If you haven't and you're still sticking around because you're curious about all this, then I gotta say, like, one of the cool parts about Metal Gear Solid is like whether we're talking about the heroes or the villains, they're all dealing with the idea of purpose. Why are they there? Why are they there on the planet, right? Why are they there in that specific spot, the specific time? And, they had to figure that sort of stuff out. And the ultimate thing is like, well, you know, we can figure out our purpose, right? We can generate our own meaning. And that is something that was very useful for me to not only hear at the time, but also it was a thing that was useful for me to see because these characters, they were dealing with the same stuff that I did. And I liked that the heroes and the villains had a very similar problem, right? It's like, hey, or we are who we are because of genes, right? Or we are who we are because we're told that we should be this, or do we decide our own path? And what does any of it mean, right? And I think themes like that, right? They come up all the time. Living is pretty much an existential nightmare if you're not careful. And so being able to navigate that or have something that helps in any way is a wonderful thing. And Metal Gear Solid came at the right time in my life, and it had left a quite an impression. And I really dig the story. I really again dig the voice cast, and this came across at a time where I was getting increasingly into voice acting, and that helped push me over the edge, along with like other games and shows, and it was a beautiful thing, because in addition to everything that I said, there's also like the boss fights. There's the music in this game. Metal Gear Solid is dripping with atmosphere. Like you can play that game and it feels distinctly itself. And it's such a beautiful thing. I replayed a lot of Metal Gear games in this last year, and like back to back, and replaying that, it felt like it did when I was younger. Like 20 years out, and that game still sparks something in me. It's something meaningful, you know. And all the while, as I get to navigate this channel, as I get to navigate what I want to do out there, I get to talk about, Metal Gear Solid and all the other entries in that franchise in a different context, right? Because I get to talk about how, hey, math is in that, right? It has always been in that, and games are such a fun way to explore things because like they give you a unique sense of empathy, and it's just like there's a lot of math involved at every step of the gameplay. There's math involved at every step behind the scene, and there's math involved with you, the player. And Metal Gear Solid, it's like it's a game where I feel like that is just like it flows so well. Uh, it's just everything is just it works, and there's so much math behind that. But um, it's just yeah. So it's a really cool game. I dig it. I can play it 20 years from that time that I first played it and still feel like that, dude back then, right? I can still say, hey, this is something that I connect with. This is something that's just great. And also, it very much feels like an anime. And I mean that in the best way. Um, and also, not only did I get to enjoy that game thoroughly, it's just like it introduced my favorite character in the entire series, Gray Fox. That ninja, the cyborg ninja, Gray Fox. And it's just like, oh, I enjoyed that game through and through. Because it's like, and the bosses, like, they had so much personality to them, and their fights were amazing. Because it's like, I like the stuff with Ocelot in the beginning, and that just sets the tone, you know. That tank fight with Raven, it's okay, but it does make you think. It does make you do some different things. Then you have the stuff with Gray Fox, and that doesn't disappoint. That is such a cool fight. And Psycho Mantis, can you say iconic? Yes, you can. That boss fight is trippy. It's fourth wall breaking. It's just really cool. The fights with Sniper Wolf are nice. And it's like I'm trying to think of anything else that I might be missing, but no. Let's talk about the big bad of the whole game, Liquid Snake. you know, that dude, he was such an annoying villain in the best way. It was a joy to hate that dude. He just kept on coming back, and it was great. Because like whether taking him on in 9D, whether you're taking him on in like Metal Gear Rex, or whether you're taking him on in Fist Fight, he's a hassle, and he's just such a fun villain. He gives you so much to work off of, um, and it's just great. I mean, I question his knowledge on genetics, but it's good. overall. And it's just like so throughout the course of the game, you know, you have that whole idea of like Big Boss looming in the background, just his legacy. And that was cool because at that time, I didn't know who Big Boss was. When I first played Metal Gear Solid, I didn't even know there was a Metal Gear and a Metal Gear 2. I didn't. And I didn't know there was that other title, that non canon version. Snake's Revenge. Uh, but yeah, so I didn't even know that back then. But they had those previous missions from Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and you could read them in Metal Gear Solid. So I had been exposed to the story and didn't realize they were a game or they were games at first, but I would later get to them. So with Metal Gear Solid, yeah, it was something that it rocked my world. It left a powerful impact. I'm sure you could tell that by now, right? Like, and so eventually, right? Like I got Metal Gear Solid like VR missions, and that was an absolute blast. It was some zany stuff in those missions, but by the end, you could unlock the ability to play as Gray Fox, and that was really cool. Also there was the Girl Lugon, aka Guardzilla. That was cool, weird. It was great. Um, and eventually, I got PS2. Now, I didn't initially start with Metal Gear Solid 2 when I got my PS2 because I knew that Raiden was coming and I wasn't thrilled to play as Raiden. But I also knew that you got to play as Snake. So it was like I had mixed feelings of it, and I'm like, I'm gonna get that eventually. But at that time, I was also like exploring some new games like Devil May Cry and Prince of Persia. And when I started out, I budgeted out 2 games, but like it wasn't that long after that I would get Metal Gear Solid 2. And oh man, that game. So even though I don't like Raiden and I do not care for the stuff with Raiden and Rose, I will say that that game is awesome. It's a great game, like through and through. Um, there's some parts that at the end that do confuse some people, but and that's fair enough. But I don't think it was too bad. And I think one of the craziest things about Metal Gear Solid 2 is there's just so much that they say about censorship in the internet and AI and all this other stuff that just like ends up being really close to home these days and has been for quite some time. There's just so much that they got right about things. But more than that, is it did what Metal Gear does best, in my opinion. It takes what worked about it from the get go and it builds to it. It adds to it. It has a certain formula, and it plays with that. It evolves because like later on, I would get to play Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and you can see that Metal Gear had this really tight structure. It had a really good formula to it, and they took that and they expanded that with Metal Gear 2. And then when you get to Metal Gear Solid, and I didn't have the context at the time, but it's like, hey, let's take what we refined in Metal Gear 2, which was a more refined version of Metal Gear 1, and let's make it 3D. Let's add to that. And then Metal Gear Solid 2 did the same. And you got the same with Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4 down the line. I think like 5 kind of went off book in some ways, but not necessarily in a bad way, but we can get to that too. So with Metal Gear Solid 2, like I said, not a Raiden fan, or at least back then. He's grown on me. But back then he was super annoying, but you could argue that that was actually the point, among other things. In any case, it was a really fun story. A lot of talking, even for Metal Gear. But again, it's like one of those things where the gameplay was so tight in that game. They added so much to Metal Gear Solid, which I enjoyed, and yeah, it was solid overall. Um, but yeah, so now at that point, I played Metal Gear Solid. I played Metal Gear Solid VR missions. I played Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. And later I would get Substance, but that came down the line. Um, so then, at that point, I had only played Metal Gear games that had been out. 2004. Metal Gear Solid 3 came out, and I was waiting for that game. Everyone was waiting for that game because, we've seen the trailers, we've seen this dude be referred to as Snake, and, we're all like, hey, right, that's Big Boss. This is his tail. Let's see what's going on, right? And that game. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater works is a sequel. It works is a prequel. It works is a standalone game. Like you can play that game having not played any other Metal Gear Solid games, and you'd be fine. And having played those other games, they just add more context. But that game works so phenomenally well on its own. Metal Gear Solid has always been a pretty creative series, and I feel like with Metal Gear Solid 3, it just highlights that. There's so much creativity, so many ways that you can approach that game, whether you're playing on the stealth side, the more action oriented side, or somewhere in between. Like, you can take advantage of the camouflage system. You can take advantage of the fact that you're in the jungle and you're dealing with all these different items. You're dealing with food. You're dealing with plants. And here's the thing: there might be like, and there's some ways for you to play with it, right? So you might have, um, sorry, you might have some plants that are poisonous, and you're like, okay, I don't want to eat those because they're just going to take away my health. That's going to damage me. But you can throw that out there in hopes that the opponent will eat it. But here's the thing: you can increase the odds that your opponent will eat it. How? Well, one of the things that I figured out playing through Metal Gear Solid 3 over the years is that if you get some TNT, you can come across different warehouses. Some warehouses store ammo, some warehouses store rations. You can blow up those warehouses along the way. If you blow up the ration warehouses, um, the opponents will starve. You'll see that like transpire in any given area if you've been at it long enough. They'll start to hallucinate. They'll get hungry, and if you throw out rotted food or poisoned food, um, that will affect them. And you could also take out the ammo houses, and they'll have less to work with when they're taking you on. You can set traps. You can do a lot. You can sneak around like no one else's business. It's a brilliant game. Big Boss is given like a lot of character. He's given a zany cast because he's working with Zero, Sigint, Paramedic, that whole crew. Eva, who comes along and she does her thing, all double crossing. That's a whole nother thing, but she's still a fun character in her own right. And then you have the boss and that dynamic between Big Boss and the boss, and it's just like their relationship is just, if that doesn't tear you up by the end of that game, you're missing some feelings. I'm just saying, like it still got to me after all these years. But Metal Gear Solid 3, it's just such a phenomenal, fun game. Like, and it's just when I'm looking at like my favorites for the series, Metal Gear Solid comes up a lot, but also Metal Gear Solid 3 and Metal Gear Solid 4, and all for good reasons. Now, to be clear, I've never played a Metal Gear game where I'm just like, oh, I don't like this, right? I never played one that was anything less than great. Um, and just so we're clear, like with 5, I had some serious issues with the story with that, and I'll get to that, but it was still a great game that could have been even better for a variety of reasons. Some outside of the game for sure. But we'll get to that. And I'm looking at the time for this video. There's a good chance that this is going to be over what I initially anticipated. And guess what? I'm okay with that. If I fall into where I wanted to, great. If not, that's fine too. Um, so Metal Gear Solid 3 is just it's amazing. So on one hand, I'm glad that they're remaking it because that will attract new audiences, right? New people all across the world. It can potentially just make some new Metal Gear fans. But it's just like having replayed it this year, it still holds up like no one else's business. It's like 2004. It still plays exceptionally well. It still looks great. It still feels great. It still has an amazing story that will resonate with you. And Metal Gear Solid has always had stellar voice acting, and Metal Gear Solid 3 is no exception to that. Um, so yeah, so that was my PS2 journey with it to an extent, right? Because there was one more part of that PS2 journey. Eventually, Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence came out, and with Subsistence, they included ports of Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. And here's the thing about that brief history lesson. So if you were over here in the States, yeah, you played Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 potentially, but here's the thing. Like the Metal Gear was distorted. You didn't play the original one because the original one was on MSX, which is a system over over in the East, or was a system over in the East, like MSX, MS2. I forget which one that came out on. But in any case, there was that, and with in the states, like you had Metal Gear come out on Nintendo, and there was also Metal Gear Solid 2: Snake's Revenge, which had nothing to do with Kojima, the creator of the series. And then like later, because of that game, there's a rumor, like a myth, that I don't think has ever been like fully verified, but I like to believe is true. Is that like somebody who was working on Metal Gear 2, Snake's Revenge, um, I had approached Kojima on a train and said, we need a true Metal Gear 2. And hence we get Metal Gear Solid 2. Oh, sorry, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Um, now, again, there's nothing to say that that's true, but I would like to believe it. In any case, so I finally got to play Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and I was ecstatic about that. They were great games. Really short by comparison to some of the other ones, but that makes sense for the time. And here's the thing: despite a lot of views of video games at the time, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 had really developed stories just from the get go. They stood out, and that's really cool. So at that point, at the end of my PS2 days, so it's like I played Metal Gear Solid on PS1 and 2 and 3 on PS2, and via subsistence for 3, I played Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. Now, in addition to playing Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, I've also played Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance. And doing the VR missions with those, I have a lot of copies of Metal Gear lying around, which some have come in handy. Is some games have died out over the years, um, and so at the end of the PS2 era, I was up to speed with my Metal Gear. I played them, and it was great. It was beautiful. And then, like 2006, 2007, PSP was in full effect. I think it came out in 2005, maybe. But I know by 2006 and 2007 it was like pretty prevalent, and I was working at GameStop. Um, so yeah, it would have definitely had to come out in that era. So I was working at GameStop like when I graduated high school and went off to college, and so we had PSPs, at that era, and we were able to play them here and there. Um, test them out and all that good stuff. And through that experience, I actually did get to play Metal Gear Acid. But I never owned a PSP, so I couldn't play things like Portable Ops, and later on, I couldn't play Peace Walker. Um, and this isn't Metal Gear, but I couldn't play Final Fantasy, Crisis Core. I don't know why I said it like that, but Crisis Core, the Final Fantasy game. So, but I would get to play that down the line, right? Um, like, and it's just as good. But this isn't about Final Fantasy, and it's not about Crisis Core. So anyway, I didn't have a PSP, but I did get to play Metal Gear Acid, which I enjoyed. It was weird. It was crazy. It's not your usual Metal Gear game. It's a turn-based card game, and it's just like it's different. It takes place in the future. It's non-canon, but like takes place in the future, potential Metal Gear world, and it's just like it's wild. I think you're playing as a clone of Solid Snake, and then there is a Metal Gear Acid 2. I think you're playing as a clone of that Solid Snake clone. And even though Solid Snake was eventually confirmed to not be a clone of Big Boss, they clarified that at the time that those Acid games came out, he was like in the story. So it's like we got a clone of a clone of a clone. But yeah, so I played Metal Gear Acid, and I played Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel. Or was it Metal Gear Ghost Babel? Either way, it was the Game Boy title, which was kind of like a hybrid of sorts between Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear, if that makes sense. So it's like it had the Metal Gear aesthetic, but like more updated with like characters from Metal Gear Solid and like themes that got further developed. So it was an interesting title. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna pause for a second, and then we're gonna continue because I got more to say. Oh, so much more, so much more. But I'm gonna have fun with it, and I hope you do too. All right, so I am back and ready to continue. But for you, probably just less than a second. But either way, I don't know why I feel the need to say that, but I do, and I like it. I want to keep everyone present where I'm at with this. Um, so, at this point, right, on my Metal Gear journey, I had played an assortment of Metal Gear, right? I had played Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Acid, Metal Gear Ghost Babel, or Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel. I really cannot remember if the Solid was in that title or not. I don't know why. Um, I think it was just Metal Gear Ghost Babel. We'll look that up eventually. Um, it's been a while. But anyway, I played a lot of Metal Gear content at that time, and it was just like I enjoyed the stories in those games so much. And when I started Metal Gear Solid, it was a time in gaming for me where I was expanding and I was finding these more narrative driven games, and it was great and it was beautiful. And it's just like I like me some Metal Gear. It's like it was fun because like yes, you have like these characters they're feeling all these emotions and they're going through these situations and they're fighting the big bad, um and at the same time there's some ridiculous over the top nonsense in some of these titles, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think one of the things I like about Metal Gear overall is that for the most part they were pretty balanced with having really serious tones and themes in the game, and also really comedic elements. Um, that kind of I feel like it got like kind of downplayed. That balance got downplayed a little bit, and like a little bit in four, but definitely in five. Again, they're still great games, but it's just like I definitely like having some like humor and nonsense, and they had their own source of nonsense, just taking it more seriously. Um, but yeah, so I played all those games, and then came Metal Gear Solid 4, right? And again, there's some build up to that, right? Because I've been enjoying these games, I've been enjoying the stories, I've been enjoying the ridiculous nonsense that came with some of it, and I just liked how creative that the games were and how you can resonate with the characters. They feel human. And here's the thing about Metal Gear villains: are they jerks? Yes, most of them are. But here's the thing: they're usually a jerk with a point, right? Like they're evil. They go over the top with their point, but like they're not explicitly the bad guy sometimes, right? Like I mean, they are, but they aren't. Like take Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid 2. He was absolutely evil, right? He did some truly reprehensible things. He killed a lot of people, but he also had some points about freedom, about the government, and just about finding your purpose and living life on your own terms. And I do find it ironic though that some of the points he was making do make him out to be a bit of a hypocrite because he ignores some things. But he actually does make some good points, and the Patriots were the ones that were in control at that point, and that's a whole nother thing. um, it's just, oh god, the Patriots, oh my god. They got too big in that series, they did. Um, but yeah, so Solid as Snake, despite some hypocrisy, despite his villainy, actually did some make some good points about freedom and choosing your own path. And who gets to decide what's right for people? And the answer, it would turn out, would largely be people. And he just wanted to make his mark in the world too, after being like living an existence where he was very controlled. So I do like stuff like that. And Big Boss does some truly reprehensible things throughout the series, like a lot, but he ends up being a pretty complicated character, and you can kind of get where he's coming from on some level. Um, Liquid Snake, less so. Ocelot, yes, but that dude's insane. And before I go to talk more about Metal Gear Solid 4, I'd like to point out that young Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 3 is dangerously unhinged lunatic, and I'm here for it. Like, oh my god, the Ocelot call. It's the most ridiculous, amazing thing like ever. I will link it in the description. If you've played Metal Gear Solid 3, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's It's amazing. And he was always like, spinning his gun and just being obnoxious and hilarious at the same time. It's just like, at first I feel like you're like, okay, this dude, he's out of his mind. He's just a crazy kid. Um, but, or I say crazy kid now because he was around my age when Metal Gear Solid 3 came out. Um, but yeah, so got this crazy dude doing crazy stuff, but that's what I mean. No, it's just like there was a lot of serious themes in Metal Gear Solid 3, but you had characters like Young Ocelot, you had Big Boss being a straight up weirdo, you had Paramedic also being a weirdo, but being endearing and funny about it. And you had a lot of characters have some back and forth. And also, while we're back on Metal Gear Solid 3, there was Snake's Nightmare. There was a prison scene, and if you save in the prison scene, after, it's a torture thing with like Snake, Big Boss. Um, if you save and then you reload that game, you get Snake's Nightmare, and it's just like it's a really fun, trippy um, segment of very different gameplay that they like pulled from like another game. I think there's a whole history behind that, but it works really well within the game because you're just like, what is going on? I don't know, but this is awesome. But yeah, so I had played a lot of Metal Gear before Metal Gear Solid 4 came out in a very short amount of time because like at that point when Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, I had been a Metal Gear fan for 5 years at that point. I played those games so much, so very much. Like I played other games too, but they kept on coming up. So I was in college and um, I was really, busy and all and trying to get myself together with some things. But Metal Gear Solid 4 came out in the summer. It came out in June of 2008. And I had to go off the internet for a while so I could avoid spoilers. And I got it. I got Metal Gear Solid 4. And it was freaking awesome. It was the most Metal Gear game to ever Metal Gear. Like, it was ridiculous. It was over the top. It was serious at the same time. There was so much that that game gets right. I know there's some people who don't like the fact that it is ridiculous and over the top, but it's like that's freaking Metal Gear, man. Like it's like that. But at the same time, again, there's a lot of serious themes, and I liked it. With Metal Gear Solid 4, you got that it was clearly made for fans that have been around for a long time, and some of those fans, again, didn't appreciate that, but screw them, I did. So did a lot of other people. There were so many nods, so many references, so many great moments. And Rex versus Ray? Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? It's the thing about it. Like, and what I really like is there's just so many cool parts that were, in the beginning of the game, we're like, okay, right, this is amazing. And each act just kept on picking up and getting better. And I think, like, by the time you get to Act 4, it's just, like, pretty much a bunch of crazy action. And yes, there's some scenes where they're talking, but it's just, like, I mean, it gets wild. And the last fight between Ocelot and Snake, insane. Speaking of Ocelot in that game, he's fun in this game, but not as fun as not as fun as young Ocelot because here he's trying to act like he's Liquid, and it's a whole needless plot. Um, but he's still fun at points, and his rivalry with Snake in that game is pretty good. I will say Meryl got done dirty in that game. I said what I said. I really like Meryl on Metal Gear Solid, even though I'd argue they probably did her a little dirty there too. I don't know. I feel like Meryl deserved better in both games, but in Metal Gear Solid 4, they had her all over the place. They did. Um, and like I said at the beginning of the video, it's like spoilers, so I don't feel bad about anything I'm about to say, but it's just like one of the highlights of the whole entire Metal Gear Solid series and Metal Gear series in general was like Big Boss returning. It was ridiculous. When you think about it, there's so much of it that doesn't make sense, but screw it, it's awesome. Um, but yeah, so Metal Gear Solid 4 was the most Metal Gear game to ever Metal Gear ever. And I remain here for it. It's just, and it was also just like it built on everything that came before. There were a few things that they sort of kept from Snake Eater, but it wasn't as in depth. But at the same time, not only did they keep those things, but they added so much more and expanded on like just everything. And so what's crazy to me though is like by the time you get to Metal Gear Solid 5, there was always talk about, oh, well, let's make it open world, and it's like the first open world Metal Gear game. I'd argue that Metal Gear Solid 4 and Metal Gear Solid 3 actually fit that title pretty good. I get that we have this idea of what open world is now, but it's like I'd argue that it's the same name for a lot of games that already existed. Now you just have more tropes involved, and not all of them are for the better, but I digress. They were great games, expansive games that allow you to explore. And then before Metal Gear Solid 5 came out, though, we had Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. So after Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, it was real tempting to be like, okay, so they're actually done with Metal Gear games, right? Um, but no. So a few years after they were done with Metal Gear Solid, they announced that they were working on two games, right? Like that they had two games that they were thinking about doing, and one of them would become Metal Gear Rising, with the idea about it being about Raiden. And at first, it was gonna be like Raiden rescuing Sonny and the story of that, but that got expanded and greatly revised. And I'd argue for the better. So it takes place after Metal Gear Solid 4, and I think that's a strength. Um, and it's just like what I like about that game is like, one, it's ridiculous and over the top, and it knows that it's ridiculous and over the top, and it relishes in it. It lives in it, and it just lets itself be itself. But what I like even more than that is that it's like with the gameplay, they had Konami team up with Platinum Games, and if you didn't know, Platinum Games, the CEO was the guy who made the first Devil May Cry, and it shows. It shows so much through the Platinum Games. So with Metal Gear Rising, it's like, hey, let's fuse Devil May Cry with Metal Gear, and these are two of my favorite franchises of all time. So it's a beautiful thing, and they nailed it. They freaking nailed it. And I replayed that this year too, and it's like, yeah. And of course, you had Armstrong, Nano Machine's son. So dumb. It's a beautiful thing. But yeah, so after Metal Gear Solid 4 and before Metal Gear Solid 5, we had something completely different. We had Metal Gear Rising. It was a great game. I enjoyed it. I can't say enough good things about that game. One bad thing I will say about that game is it never got a sequel. What's up with that? But hey, even though it didn't get a sequel, what it was great, and I replayed it this year. It's still great, 10 years on, and that is awesome. And then in 2015, we got Metal Gear Solid 5, and at this point, it was an interesting journey for me because when I got Metal Gear Solid 5, right, Metal Gear Solid 5 came out in September, right, of 2015. Um, and I had just started teaching then, so it's just like I had to balance some things out because it's like, ooh, I'm gonna be teaching a lot, and I'm gonna be at multiple places doing just the most. So it's like, but Metal Gear Solid 5, yeah, and I found a way. I made some time, and we're gonna act like I slept during that time. Okay, we're not gonna act like it. I didn't. But anyway, like Metal Gear Solid 5 came out then. But while we're on the topic, though, if we're being a bit honest, part of Metal Gear Solid 5 came out, the biggest part, right? Because the truth is, right, you had Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zero, which was the prologue of Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. And that came out, I think, 2013. Yeah, and I didn't get it until like I think 2014, um, when it was a bit more in sale. Because it was kind of crazy that they sold the prologue separately, something that they never did in a Metal Gear game. It just kind of rubs you the wrong way. But that being said, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, it's good. It's ridiculously short, but it's good. It wouldn't have been worth the initial price to me, but it was good. And it was just like it's crazy though because it had a different look and a different feel from the Phantom Pain, and I don't feel like they sank up, but they're both good in their own right. And so Metal Gear Solid 5, the Phantom Pain comes out in 2015, and I played it. I played it a lot, and I couldn't shut up about it while I was playing it because I had a lot of fun. It was a good game gameplay wise, and I was engaged with the story and wanted to see what happened, but the ending was just like the worst to me. I hated that ending because it's like, oh yeah, you haven't been playing this Big Boss, you've been playing as Venom Snake. It wasn't just a name we were calling him; it's a different character entirely. It's the paramedic that was in the helicopter in Ground Zero that came out years ago that most of y'all probably weren't gonna remember. Yep, that's the big twist. Like, you're him the whole time, but at the same time, we're gonna get meta with it. Because it's like, yeah, you were playing as Big Boss because now, since you're contributing to that legend, it's not just Big Boss that's Big Boss, it's you too. And I hated that. I got what I got what they were going for. I really did. But it was a slap in the face because it's just like it messes with the canon in a big way. And canon is it is what you make of it, but I am someone who has been deeply invested in Metal Gear for years. And by the time the Phantom Pain came out, I had been a Metal Gear Solid fan for 12 years. It had been a big part of my life for a lot of the reasons that I said earlier on. So for them to just kind of do that with the story, it's like, okay, screw this. But I had to get it out of my system. And then, like a year later, I was reflecting. It's like, so do I really dislike this game that much just because of the ending? And here's the thing, no, not really. Because Metal Gear Solid 5, whether we're talking about Ground Zeroes or the Phantom Pain, they are great games. They're well designed. Well designed in a gameplay aspect because the Phantom Pain also does some stupid stuff where it's like it makes you repeat missions, just on a higher difficulty to get the true ending, which was the yeah. I was gonna say something. In some other videos, I might not have a problem saying that, but I was trying to avoid expletives in this one. Um, just my own thing for this video. Not that I'm opposed to using them in general or even on this channel. I just try to be more deliberate about it. But here I was about to go off tangent with it. And I still went off tangent, just not the way I was going to. So crisis averted. But but still, oh god. And look, I'm not gonna edit any of that out because I don't care enough to do that. Also, it would take more work than I would like. But my point is, that ending was crap. I did not like it. But it does not take away from the game or what it accomplishes. And even though there's some things from design level with the later missions that suck, the actual gameplay is pretty great. Um, it can be pretty rewarding to play, and you can sink a lot of hours into that. So overall, when I look back on Metal Gear Solid 5, I really did enjoy that gameplay. And even if I felt like jaded by that ending, I come across posts over the years where I would just be talking about how great Metal Gear Solid 5 was when I was playing it. So it still was something that I got to enjoy. And even though for a period of time I didn't want to look at the other Metal Gear Solid games, it's like um, I got over that because they're great games. And even if I never play 5 again, um, it doesn't take away the fact that I had fun playing 5 in the first place, right? And it doesn't take away uh, from the other Metal Gear games. So overall, like I think Metal Gear Solid 5 actually does accomplish a lot, and they push the system in some new ways. Yeah, there's stuff I don't like, but there's a lot that I do like, and like, oh my god, the Battle of Philanthropus. Stupid name for a Metal Gear, mind you, and I get why they did it. There's a whole thing with it, but cool fight, like just crazy fight. So that's pretty much how Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear end for a while. And there was a whole public thing between Kojima, the creator, and Konami, the publisher. And it's like, it was a mess. And you should look into it if you haven't. But the basic idea is like they said he quit. He said they fired him, and it was a mess. And it was, from what we can tell, largely over Metal Gear Solid 5. But obviously, I think it's fair to say that there's some other things that came with that. Either way, they fired Kojima. He went on to do Kojima things, and he seems happy with it. And Konami, they were just doing whatever for a while, and then they released Metal Gear Survive, and that was a stupid, crappy idea where it's like, come on, we know what you're doing, and it's awful. You should feel awful about it. Um, so after that whole fiasco, years well into the future or our current present, You hear the announcement about Metal Gear Solid 3, or rather, the remake Metal Gear Solid Delta. Um, and people were thinking about like, okay, well, they're gonna do like remakes of Metal Gear Solid 2 down the line. And I think that's a fair assumption, but we haven't seen it yet. And with Metal Gear Solid Delta, that was a rumor for a while, but we did get that confirmed. We haven't seen a lot of it yet, but a lot of people are excited. I think it's just crappy that they keep on doing these things, even with their whole issues with like Kojima. But if people go and get that game, I mean, that's fair. I can't knock them for that. They didn't mess up. That was Konami. But it's just like, I do think about that whenever I hear stuff about the remake. In any case, um, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to say. So with Metal Gear Solid and just Metal Gear overall, because we're really, I mean, there's more Metal Gear Solid games than Metal Gear, but Metal Gear is a whole franchise where we're talking about the old Metal Gear games, Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Acid, Metal Gear Ghost People, whatever. Metal Gear is a big series. It's always been story driven. I've always liked that. It always has had good characters, good bosses, overall, and the gameplay has always been great. They figured out very early on what they wanted to do, and they've expanded that through the main games, in one form or another. And then, like with spin-offs like Metal Gear Acid, they took some chances, but they very much had the Metal Gear framework. And I just like that. In addition to everything I just said, the music in Metal Gear has always been amazing. Even in the older games, they had music that just kicked. It wasn't generic. It stood out. And then with the Metal Gear Solid era games, even more so to me. But you couldn't really lose either generation, right? The old stuff, the newer stuff, whatever. Um, and there's some distinctive sound effects. But overall, like I feel very passionately about Metal Gear, and my journey it started with hearing about a Metal Gear game, and eventually I played Metal Gear Solid, and it changed my life. Which it feels odd to say in a way, but at the same time it doesn't. So yeah, Metal Gear, 20 years of Metal Gear. It's been a journey, my friends, and here's to play more Metal Gear in the future. I'll see you in the next one.